Morning world, it's Thursday the 3rd of August 2017. It's about 7:30 a.m. in the morning. Moon's in Sagittarius, will be all day. Void moon later today for a couple of hours. No big deal. Here's something different. The curious case of Roger Bollingbroke. Around the 13th century, especially in France, when the Pope at the time was waging war on the Cathar religion, in order to discredit the Cathars and to consolidate the position of Catholicism in France, the Pope at the time was making lots of allegations around sorcery involving the Cathars. Sorcery in France at that time was perhaps a lot more of a serious accusation than it was anywhere else, involving Satanism, demon worship, devil worship, etc. Over the next 200 years, the ideas of using sorcery as an accusation to discredit people extended across the Channel into Britain, into England at that time. And over the 1400s, a lot of famous women, Joan of Navarre, Jacqueline of Luxembourg, Elizabeth Woodville, Margaret of Anjou, all became embroiled in court circumstances involving accusations of sorcery or encompassing royalty, which is a mixture. Compassing is a mixture, it's halfway between sorcery and idle gossip. One of the most famous cases here involves a woman called Eleanor Cobham. She was the mistress of the Duke of Lancaster, Humphrey, the Duke of Gloucester, Humphrey, who was the son of Henry IV. When his cousin Henry V died, Humphrey became the ward, the protector of the young king Henry VI, and may well have held aspirations to take over the throne from him. Humphrey divorced his wife and married his mistress, a woman called Eleanor Cobham, who did have aspirations of grandeur. Helena Cobham associated with a woman called forget the name, Michelle Jourdain, something like that, the Witch of Eye near Westminster in London, and procured a number of different herbal concoctions, primarily to try and ensure that she became pregnant, because Humphrey was old and perhaps not that firm. She also, Helena Cobham, conspired with a number of astrologers, John Hume, Thomas Southwell, and particularly Roger Bollingbroke. And from this, they conspired to produce a horoscope for the king, Henry VI, showing that he was likely to suffer a life-challenging illness and possibly even die in the late part of the year 1441, I think it was. Bearing in mind that the printing press had only just been discovered in Gutenberg, and the printing had yet to reach the UK, so everything that was being talked about was idle gossip and rumour. The king heard about how Eleanor had got these astrologers together, including Roger Bollingbroke, and forecast his death, and was so perturbed that he got his courtiers at court to secure other astrologers to check this prophecy out. And the royal astrologers at the time came back and said, "Look, this is rubbish. You know, there's no way you're going to die." But then they would have said that, wouldn't they? Because they valued their jobs. As a result, Roger Bollingbroke, Thomas Southwell, Eleanor Cobham were all arrested and brought before magistrates. Thomas Southwell died mysteriously in the Tower of London the night before his trial. Eleanor Cobham was charged with sorcery, conspiring to encompass the king, and had to do a lot of penance. She was imprisoned in a number of different castles, and eventually died at Beaumaris Castle in Anglesey in northwest Wales. Roger Bollingbroke, the astrologer, he made confessions before the magistrates. Whether those confessions were voluntary or enforced, no one knows. But he confessed to intending to harm the king and to all types of unethical, immoral forms of conjurations involving an element of sorcery. Now, sorcery at this time was anyone who was using herbal concoctions, anyone who was using witchcraft, consulting with the devil, etc., etc., very different to what it means today. He was also accused of being a necromancer, but a necromancer at that time does not just involve summoning the dead, as the word means today. It actually involved working with the dark, and it's very similar to the word negro as opposed to necro at that time. He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to a rather unpleasant death. He was tied to a hurdle and dragged through the streets of London from Westminster to Tyburn, where he was hung to within an inch of his life, and he was drawn and then quartered. Now, this is particularly a gruesome form of death. To be drawn means having your entrails pulled out whilst you're still alive, and then he was cut in half and cut into quarters. His head was put on a spike in London, and his quarters were sent to different regions of the UK. Now, astrologers have had a history of reaching somewhat gory and grimy deaths, but this did begin to peter out in the 14 and 1500s. Rarely do you find astrologers being killed after this time. The last famous astrologer to be executed for their beliefs was, what's his name? The professor of astrology at Bologna University in 1600. Can't remember his name for the life of me. It's on the tip of my tongue. He was burnt at the stake with his astrology books by the Inquisition. He was the last famous astrologer to be killed in Europe for his beliefs. But Bollingbroke, astrologers at this time astrology was common in the UK at this time. It was a mixture of astronomy and astrology. The telescope hadn't been discovered. There was no difference between the two. Why was Bollingbroke injured and killed so heavily? Was it because, it wasn't because he got his predictions wrong, and it wasn't because he made predictions about the king. I've made predictions about the various royal members of the family and the timelines and what's to come, and no one's hung, drawn or quartered me as yet. There are rumours that he was having illicit conjurations with the king's mistress. Whether that's true, because Henry VI was he was a bit of a dandy, and whether he actually had a mistress or not is open to negotiation. I find this a fascinating subject. Yesterday I was at the Royal Archives in Kew, and I was privy to an amazing session where the idea of sorcery and bastardry in the 15th century was discussed at length. And so I wonder, why was Bollingbroke killed? And why, over the millennia, have astrologers been persecuted so much for making predictions about the future? Is it because it falls outside the remit of the church? Long lesson today, folks. Hope this was interesting. Catch you tomorrow. Bye.